look at verse 30. Then he went out and began to go through Galilee. And he did not want anyone to know about it, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. They did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask him. Evidently, up to this point, when Christ is now heading back to go to Judah and going back to Jerusalem, where he will spend the last Passover feast. At that Passover feast, before the Passover feast, well, Christ will institute the Lord's Supper in an upper room in which that Lord's Supper will be used to remember him in regard to his sacrifice, shedding of his blood, but also the Lord's Supper will be for the purpose of proclamation to proclaim that after his resurrection, Jesus Christ will come, will come back. But that Lord's Supper is to signify the crucifixion and the sacrifice of Christ, and it's also to signify the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then later, of course, he ascended into heaven after spending 40 days here upon the earth, as recorded in the book of 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter. Appeared to so many people that there's no doubt whatsoever that Christ had been raised from the dead. All right, any questions, any comments that anyone from last week, Wednesday? Okay, let's go on then. So he goes through Galilee. And the thing about this, it says over here in verse 30, he did not want anyone to know about it. And then you got to look at the next verse to understand whenever you've got statements that are made like this, as to the reason why Christ didn't want anyone else to know about his being going through Galilee. And then in verse 31, he says, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them. So this is you might say, a confidential meeting with his apostles to privately tell these apostles that he has to go to Jerusalem, that he'll be delivered into the hands of men, they will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. This is a very, very important message for these apostles to know, because it takes the death, burial, and the resurrection of Christ to set forth the great salvation which will be provided by Christ's sacrifice on the cross. He stated in 1 Peter that even before the foundation of the world, you have God's plan of salvation being formulated or being formed and designed even before the creation of the heavens and the earth. Already God was designing that great plan of salvation, which is centered around his Son, Jesus Christ. I look at Romans the 5th chapter. There's the Romans the 5th chapter. There are many places in both the Old Testament, but especially in the New, of the events of the death, burial, and the resurrection that must take place in this last Passover feast that Christ is going to attend. And so when I look at the 5th chapter of the book of Romans, it said this in verse 6, while we were still helpless, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. One will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man someone would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, having now been justified by his love, by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through Christ. If while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more then, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. So this is the crux of the whole gospel plan of salvation. The sacrifice of Christ upon the cross. We have to look at that crucified Christ and to understand the great love that God has for you and me. God created you and me. He didn't want any one of us to perish, not willing that any should perish, is what he wrote, or what Peter wrote in 2 Peter 3. So Peter has stated God doesn't want us to perish, but that God is long-suffering towards all, that he's waiting for the day of repentance on each one of us, so that none of us will perish, and miss heaven itself. So he wants this eternal fellowship with you and me. That's part of the reason why he created you and me, is to have this fellowship with his creatures. And so to have that fellowship with his creatures, he helps us to live faithfully here upon this earth. And that when we depart from this earth, then God is willing to take us into heaven. Just like what Revelation, the 2nd chapter, verse 10 says, you be faithful unto death, and you shall receive the crown of life. And so this Romans, the 5th chapter, that tells me, you look at the words that are used in regard to the ones that Christ died for. In verse 6, it says, Christ died for the ungodly. He just didn't die for his friends, and he just didn't die for the ones that he loved. He died for the ungodly. That one. Those who oppose God, those who rebelled against God, those who had sinned against God, Christ was sent to die for those people. Second thing that you look at in regard to the one that Christ died for, the second word I read is found in verse 8. While we were yet sinners, ungodly people, now he says sinners, Christ died for us. And so we've been justified by his blood when Christ was crucified upon the cross. So justification on the part of God by virtue of the fact that God had sacrificed his Son on the cross. Third thing about this sacrifice, we won't have to go through the wrath of God. I obey him, and because of God's love for each one of us by sacrificing his Son, I'll avoid the wrath of God. When I go to Hebrews 10, the Hebrew writer had said this: it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And so what is expected is the fearful judgment of which God will judge each one of us because of his righteousness and because of his justice. That you and I will be judged honestly and fairly, due to the fact is the justice of God now. And so going further as to the words that are used by Paul, we shall escape from the wrath of God. But here's another one, the fourth thing. Even while we were enemies, God died for us. And that even though when we were apart from God, that sin has caused us to be separated from God. God, through the sacrifice of his Son, reconciled us. We received the peace through that sacrifice, that we now have peace with God, and because we have peace with God, we've been reconciled with him. And then you have the last one that is stated over here. We were enemies. We were, then we've been reconciled, saved by his wrath. And now he says, we shall be saved by his life. All of those things describe the persons or the people that God had saved through his Son. So every time I read this, Romans 5, verse 6, and all the way down to Romans 5 and 11, I'm filled with gratitude, and I'm filled with the love that I have for God, because God was willing and did sacrifice his Son, even while I was ungodly, even while I was an enemy, even while I was separated from him, all of that. God still loved me so much that he sent his Son to die upon the cross. All right, let's go back to the book of Mark again. Questions on that? So it's an important foundation of the church, and it's a very important foundation for the gospel plan of salvation. This death, this burial, and resurrection. See, Paul called it first importance. It is of first importance, he says, in 1 Corinthians 15, 1 and 2. The first vital importance is Christ died, was buried, and that he was raised from the dead. I go back now to chapter 9 of this book. It says over here, in chapter 9, we have left Peter now, is saying to Christ, behold, we have left everything and followed you. And Jesus said, truly I say to you, there is no one who has left house, or brothers, or sisters, or mother, or father, or children. Skip one page. Where am I at? Yeah, I read the wrong verse. He went and began to go through Galilee. Let me start all over again in verse 30. He didn't want anybody to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them of this important, basis of salvation, that the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. Apostles didn't know this. And apostles couldn't understand or couldn't, you might say, comprehend the statement that Christ had made in this verse, 31. So what's this all about? Isn't Christ going to be the Messiah? Is going to save us? So what is this all about in regard to that he's going to be delivered into the hands of men? They'll kill him, and when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. They did not understand this statement. And yet, at the same time, they were afraid to ask him what did this mean in regard to he being killed. Now, they came to Capernaum now. And when he was in the house, he began to question them. What were you discussing on the way? They just learned from Christ that Christ had to be crucified or had to be killed, and that he will be buried, and that he will rise 3 days later now. That's shortly before, you know, right after that, they came to Capernaum, and then Christ had to question them, what were you discussing on the way? You know, sometimes I wonder too, in regard to these events that are happening. Christ had already told, just before this, that he's going to be delivered into the hands of these men and they're going to kill him. That's a very tragic announcement that Christ made to the apostles. Yet, when you come to verse 33, and they came to Capernaum, he began to question them, what were you discussing on the way? You would think that these apostles would be discussing about what did the Son of Man was talking about, that he's going to be killed. Rather than discussing that important revelation by Christ to his apostles, they were asking who will be the greatest among them. Now what, how would you think, what would you think about these apostles just heard the fact that Christ told them, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be killed. I'll be buried, and on the third day I'll be rising up from the dead. And soon as they went on their way to Capernaum, these apostles were not discussing at all in regard to what Christ had revealed to them about his being killed. They were more interested in who will be the greatest in the kingdom. People, right? People. Sometimes you wonder how they think. Sometimes you wonder how people act. Sometimes you wonder how can a very, very important part of this great plan of salvation, of which Christ is teaching and training for 3.5 years, these apostles to carry out their great commission after he goes back to heaven. And they were discussing who's the greatest. So in some sense, there's some arrogance in it. In some sense, there's a lack of humility on it. And in some sense, they didn't even seem to care whether Christ will be killed in Jerusalem. What were you discussing on the way? In verse 34, they kept silence. Because on the way they had discussed with one another which of them was the greatest. And yet Christ knew what was in their hearts, and Christ knew what was in their thoughts and in their mind. And that's the reason why, he said this, sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he shall be last. Last of all, and he'll be the servant of all. So implying the fact that this is also recorded in Matthew the 16th chapter. And this discussion of who's the greatest is also recorded in Matthew the 16th chapter. And so he says, if anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all, and he shall be the servant of all. So it's difficult to comprehend the thinking of these apostles after they heard that their master shall be killed. And so he tells them, he called the 12 and said that if anyone wants to be first, and evidently that's what the discussion was about, is who shall be the greatest, and so who shall ever be the greatest shall be the first. And then he tells them, anyone who wants to be first, he shall be last of all, and he'll be the servant of all. Greatness doesn't come in position. Just like, John and James, his brother, they had the mother go to Christ, and the mother asked Christ, would you give my two sons the right hand and the left hand, place when you come into the kingdom? So even the mother was caught up in regard to who shall be the greatest. These 12. And yet there'll be some way, just like Peter, in some way, when the time comes for them to carry out the Great Commission as recorded in the 2nd chapter of the book of Acts, when the first gospel sermon was preached, in some way, Christ will remove the arrogance from these apostles. So here again, he goes on to one other thing that he uses. He says in verse 35, if anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Service becomes the key of being great. You serve Christ, you serve God, you serve your fellow man. In that way, you can be first. But not in position, not because you're sitting on the right side or you're sitting on the left side of his throne will make you great. What will make you great, Christ says, is your service. To illustrate this, here's what he did, what Christ did. He took a child, in verse 36, set that child before them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one child like this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me does not receive me, but him who sent me. So the greatest is the one ultimately will be serving God. Must have the humility, must have the attitude of what this child is. And so when he says, whoever receives one child like this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me does not receive me, but him who sent me. All right, any comments on this? Anyone? Especially verse 37. Any comments on verse 37? Huh? Okay? Go ahead, Greg.
I was thinking when we were at 30 and 31 and 32, as they were listening to him, at least they did listen. I don't want to give them that much. But when they listened, they heard him and they thought, well, he's going to die, so who's going to take over?
Yeah.
Then they were thinking, well, who is the greatest one that's going to... Guys, who's stepping up on this one, right?
That's right.
And then he had to give them that lesson. Okay, now you're going to serve if you want to be the greatest. It all just works so beautifully right there in 10 verses. Let's go home.
It's amazing. People, are funny, is what I usually say.
Yeah, it's like they were following him. They said, we're with you, we're with you, we're with you. And he said, well, I'm going to die. And they said, well, wait a minute. We're not quite with you then.
Yeah.
But we'll carry on for you.
I want to know who's going to be the greatest. Okay. All 12 of them were in this discussion as to who will be the greatest. All 12. And one mother of 2 of them went to see Christ himself and asked Christ, can you give my 2 sons the chief seats? Make them the greatest. So you don't become great just because someone appoints you to become great. This one, when he brought the child, that this child, when you look at it, what it says there, whoever receives one child like this, he set before them, took this child, He's telling them, if you would serve this one child, this little child, if you would serve him, then he tells them, he will receive me. Whoever receives me does not receive me, but him who sent me. See, so often, people like to do only great service and would like to do only serve great men. So when Christ, instead of taking someone that's great in popularity, great in wealth, or great whatever great, that man might be, takes this little child and place them before them, and tell them, the one who is great is the one that can serve this one child. They may think that the child is not worth anything, that's the reason why. And therefore, put that thing right in front of them. Put that child right in front of them. Anyone that serves this child not only serves me, but serves my Father who sent me. So it's teaching humility. It's teaching service without question in regard to who they'll serve. As long as they perform that service in the name of Christ, and as long as they perform that service on behalf of God, that person, that apostle, will become great in his eyes. Question, anyone? Charles.
This lesson goes, we hear this lesson all through the New Testament,
Yes.
all through the Gospels. And one of the things that it's saying is one of the things that's so hard for us to do, and that is to recognize that every person that we deal with is a soul that was bought with the blood of Christ. And,
That's right.
I don't care whether they're nice or whether they're not nice, whether they're mean, whether they act ugly to us or whatever. It's still a person bought with the blood of Christ.
Yeah. And it's a person is a creature of God.
And it's hard. It's hard to treat them like we should.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. Okay? Anyone else? That's the kind of lesson that you have over here for us to really learn. We really learn now. I've used this illustration several times. There's a song, maybe some of you will remember. There's a song in the Broadway play called South Pacific. That song was called "You Gotta Be Taught." But maybe none of you remember it. I do because I love the Broadway play of Rogers and Hammerstein and all of them. The music is good. You might say, the Frenchman who was part of the play had fell in love with a girl from Arkansas. And yet, that girl had shunned him because of the fact that he's been married and that he's been married again and that the wife was a Polynesian woman. Okay? And so his friend, the Lieutenant Cable, had said, they didn't, they weren't born with it, he says. They were taught. And the song was, you gotta be taught to hate. And you gotta be taught from the beginning of age 7 or age 8. You gotta be taught to hate those people whose eyes are oddly shaped. And you gotta be taught, to hate people whose skin is of a different shape, a different color. And that's true. a lot of our prejudice come when we were young in the place where we were raised. And so we learn those prejudices as we grew up until such time we learn that we need to put away all these prejudices and be able to learn how to love everyone. And the reason why I need to love everyone is because God wants me to talk to everyone about their soul salvation. So I cannot let, one whose color of his skin is yellow or brown or black prevent me from talking to him about the gospel. And I can't let anyone with a slant eyes or whatever to prevent me from talking to that one about the fact of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In other words, all of them, they all made of one blood according to Acts, the 17th chapter. And because all of us are made of one blood, all of them deserve the salvation which is in Jesus Christ. So I shouldn't let my prejudice against people prevent me from taking that gospel and presenting that gospel to that individual and save him. I watched the South Pacific War because many of the ships, the landing ships, the crafts, the airplane, all passed through here. I saw my first B-29 flying over here. They were going to the South Pacific. And in one of those B-29s was the atom bomb that will use that bomb to what? Destroy Hiroshima. So I saw all those, all of those, throughout the World War. So I took an interest in the World War. And one of the things that I learned, that if you're injured in battle, they give you plasma, right? Not whole blood, but it's plasma. And there was a story that came out that there was a soldier who was severely injured, needed blood transfusion, blood plasma. And they were going to give him the transfusion. He found out that that blood didn't come from a white Caucasian soldier, so he refused. Now, I don't want that. That blood's no good for me. Okay? That's what prejudice can do, to the point of, you not acting rationally and refuse to accept that transfusion because of the fact it didn't come from a white Caucasian male. Because he was white Caucasian, the one that was injured. But that's what happens, though, among people. That's how people think. And a lot of it is because of the fact they were taught all of these prejudices when they were young, growing up. That's why I'm glad, still glad, of the fact that my mother and father came from the Philippines. So all of us that live in a plantation, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, Filipinos were the last to come to Hawaii. They were all immigrant to it, immigrant workers working in sugar fields. And I'm glad that I was raised in a plantation because all of the children of these immigrants all attended the same school. We got along real well, no problem. Regardless, is the girl going the one with the Chinese, Korean, Mexican, also Spanish, or Japanese, Spanish and all that. Doesn't matter. We all got along well together. Because as kids, we were raised together, and as kids, we just love each other. You know? So when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and started the war, among us, among those who went to school together, had no animosity at all against the Japanese. Can you imagine that? No. I still dated Japanese girls. And Japanese parents welcomed me. In fact, they thanked me. And they thanked me and said, I'm so glad you're taking my daughter out. And I'm not a Japanese. I was a Filipino. But that's the thing. So it's not, it's the environment that you were raised to, that you tend and you see these barriers break down from the time that we were children. So this thing here that you read about here, what the gospel is trying to teach, is that all people were created, equally, and all of these people, according to Acts 17 chapter, were made of one blood. There's not a blood of Japanese, and there's not a blood of black, or there's not a blood of Chinese. All the same blood. When I was taking Christian evidence, in school, the teacher had gotten a report from the FBI laboratory. That report said you cannot tell the difference, of blood between different races. They're all the same. Black, white, yellow, brown, and all that. All the blood is the same. But the report came out also. But you can tell the difference between the blood of a human being and the blood of a monkey. So that means you and I are not descended from monkeys. So it's great that you can, that science teacher did that for us and said, just want to let you know, we all have the same blood. The only time that our blood is different is when your blood is compared with an animal blood. So the monkey's blood or the gorilla's blood is not the same like the human blood. And so he made the statement very strongly. So we're not descended from monkeys. We're not descended. So that was a good lesson for us to learn and to see it, tested in the laboratory in regard to the difference of our blood. All right, let's go on further. I'm getting away, okay? So go on further then. Look at verse 38 of this chapter 9. John said to him, Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to prevent him because he was not following us. Now here's something else that's, different. Here's somebody that's not an apostle, and maybe not a disciple of Christ, and yet this person was casting out demons. As you can see, in verse 38. We tried to prevent him, he says, because he was not following us. Jesus said, do not hinder him. There is no one who will perform a miracle in my name and be able soon after to speak evil of me. For he who is not against us is for us. He's not one of the apostles. He was not a follower of Christ in this particular case, as I can see. And yet, when these apostles saw him casting out demons, and that they knew that Christ could cast out demons, and they knew too that Christ had given these apostles the power to cast out demons, they didn't want to have fellowship with this guy. And yet, this is what Jesus said to these apostles. Don't hinder him. Which means, let him do what he's doing, even in the casting out demons. Let him do it. And then he gives you the reason. Because there's nobody, he says, who will perform a miracle in my name and be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. So Christ is saying to these apostles that you'll see later that this man that cast out this demon will not speak evil of me. There's another strange thing that I come across in the events of Christ and in casting out demons. And then he goes on to say this: he who is not against us is for us. So this man who cast out demons, even as you and I have cast out demons, is not against us, he's for us. They were together, is what Christ is saying to these apostles. So don't hinder him. Let him do what he's doing. The thing that I look at also in this verse 39, I ask myself, was this casting out demon by this man, was it done in the name of Jesus Christ?
Verse 38 says it was.
Okay? Let's look at verse 38. Verse 38, we saw someone casting out demons where? In your name. So this person was casting out demons in the name of Jesus Christ. And Christ said, do not hinder him. Anyone who will perform a miracle in my name will be able soon after to not speak evil of me. And so Christ is telling these apostles, let him alone. He's casting out demons in my name. Now, I don't know how he got that power, because it doesn't say. All I know is he has the power to cast out demons, but the important thing about casting out demons in this case, it was casting out demons in the name of Jesus Christ. And so Christ had said this: he who is not against us is for us. And if that one that perform a miracle in my name, he'll be able soon afterward, he won't be able to speak evil of me. All right? Then you go in verse 41. Whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because of your name as followers of Christ, truly I say to you, he will not lose his reward. Yeah.
So in a later book, there's a similar story of where some men face to face with Jesus said, didn't we cast out demons in your name? And Jesus said, get away from me, I don't know you. So what's different?
What the difference is in regard to, well, let me say this. I got the one you're quoting from, I think, is Matthew the 7th chapter. All right, that's the end of the Sermon on the Mount. In the 7th chapter, he said in verse 20, or verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And look at the next verse. In your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles. And then Christ said to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. This one they're sinners. So they were using, just like what he says over here. Did we not perform many miracles in your name? Did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not in your name cast out demons? In your name perform many miracles? The difference is in verse 23, in which Christ had said to them, I'll declare to them, I never knew you. And why? These practice lawlessness. And lawlessness, as you will see in 1 John 3, lawlessness means transgression of the law.
Just going back to Steve's question, I think we need to take what Jesus says here in verses 38 and 39 a little bit more narrowly, because he's not saying that this is a good man. He's not saying this man is saved or anything like that. He's just saying, hey, don't forbid him from
Yes.
casting out demons, since he's doing it in my name.
Yeah.
Now, we can look back in the Old Testament and we can see God using all kinds of wicked people
Yeah.
to do his will. And might be another case right here.
Yeah. You see? But the fact is, what the scripture said, cast out demons in whose name?
Yep.
In the name of Christ. So you might ask, what's the difference in this one of Matthew 7? When he says, did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not perform many miracles in your name? And then verse 23, I will declare to them, I never knew you, and the reason is you practice lawlessness. And it goes back to verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, who will enter the kingdom of heaven. But you look at the next verse, the next phrase, he who does the will of my Father. That's the key. Yeah.
So if he's not doing the will of the Father, where did he get the authority to cast
I
out
don't
demons?
know. It doesn't say, Stephen, so I can't speculate on where he got it.
They were part-timers.
All I know, the difference between that one that cast out demons in the name of Christ is different from this one, because these guys that did all of this, in fact, more than just cast out demons, is to prophesy in the name of Christ and in the name perform other miracles, is the fact that the last sentence, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. That's all I can say. This guy here in Matthew 7 is a sinner. He was practicing lawlessness.